Welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Elizabeth Liz Muschett, and today my star sister, Madam Simon, is here to join me, and we're talking about Venus stations retrograde in Aries. How are you today, Simon?
Oh, decent enough. It's been a busy week. How are you doing?
Yeah, people are getting a lot busier. Yes, I worked out in my yard, so that felt good to get out there and mow the top half of the yard and move some bark.
Well, the this little window of non-retrograde motion in between retrogrades, I think, is where people are kind of trying to get at least something done before things slow down again. So,
Yes, absolutely. So, Madam Simon's website is iconalchemy.com, and my website is alightpath.com, and we both enjoy hearing from you. And we're talking about Venus in this episode. And Venus stations retrograde on March 1st at 4:37 p.m. Pacific Standard Time and 7:37 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at 10 degrees of Aries in 50 minutes. And then Venus will station direct on April 12th at 6:02 p.m. Pacific, and that should be daylight time because it'll be daylight time by then, and 9:02 p.m. daylight time Eastern time at 24 degrees Pisces. Venus is in the sign of Pisces from January 2nd to February 3rd, and then again from March 27th to April 30th. And Venus is in Aries from February 3rd to March 27th, and then re-enters April 30th through June 5th. You want to tell us about the shadow phase, Simon, please?
so the shadow phase, the pre-shadow phase is when Venus is in the degrees of first Pisces and then Aries that she will be retrograding back through. And then in the post-shadow phase, that is when she is covering the ground that she previously covered, but is now doing so direct. And so the pre-shadow phase lasts from January 28th through March 1st, and the post-shadow phase lasts from April 12th through May 16th.
Thank you for that. And Venus is ruled by Taurus, or it rules Taurus and Libra, and is associated with the 2nd and 7th house. And some key words for Venus are love, and that's giving and receiving, beauty, a sense of values, money, well-being, what you like, material assets, one's romantic life, pleasure, art, fashion, design, style, connections, networking, equality and justice, and some cautions are overindulgence, not feeling loved, addiction, self-indulgent, and self-centered. Do you want to add anything?
No.
And I'll let you do Aries.
Right. Okay. So Aries is the first and youngest sign of the zodiac. It is a cardinal sign. So that means that it initiates, it creates, it's enthusiastic and energetic. It's a fire sign. So it's passionate and bold and creative and is active, acts with courage and spirit. Its ruling planet is Mars. And modern astrologers may associate it with the first house. I'm a stodgy traditionalist, and I don't go with the so-called 12-letter alphabet. But we can see some correlations with identity, which is governed by the first house. Okay, the mantra that is associated with Aries is "I am." And some keywords are trailblazer, active, warrior, initiative, adventurous, pioneering, courageous, brave, strong, assertive, and motivated. And the caution would be rage, resentment, warlike, impulsive, and aggressive.
Thank you. And then Pisces is the oldest and last sign of the zodiac. It's mutable, so it's a flexible energy. It brings projects to completion and ties up loose ends. The ruling planet, Neptune, is the modern ruler, and Jupiter is the traditional ruler. It's a water sign, so it's emotional, fluid, flowing, intuitive, and empathic. And the mantra is I imagine. And some keywords are compassion, visionary, music, spiritual life, sensitive, empathic, and artistic. And the caution can be confused, foggy, illusionary, short sighted, oversensitive, and escapist. Would you like to add anything?
No, that pretty much covers it.
So Venus stations retrograde on March 1st at 10 degrees Aries. And here's a chart for Seattle with Venus circled in the ninth house. Or no, the eighth house. It's just at the very tail end of the eighth house here in Seattle. And here we have the chart again with the aspects. So would you like to start, Simon?
Okay, so at the time of the station retrograde, Venus is conjoined by the moon. And then we see that Saturn and the North Node and Mercury and Neptune are all conjunct in Pisces together, with the Sun and Ceres co-present in Pisces. We see that there is a grand water trine between Mars in Cancer, which is ruled by that moon that's conjoining Venus. And then actually in Aries, so there's actually mutual reception going on between Mars and the moon there, that then Venus is going to be colored by. Okay. And so that mutual reception indicates that each of these planets is in each other's signs, and therefore it's like the planet is an honored guest in the home of a friend, and therefore has more resources perhaps to do its job than it would if it was just in some other random place. Okay. And might actually not have to work as hard to do what it wants to do. Because when you're staying with a friend, a lot of times a friend is actually going to treat you better than you might treat yourself in your own home, So yes, so and then we see that in that grand water trine, Mars is also the ruler of Scorpio, where Vesta is. So Vesta has some reception going on there from Mars. And then Saturn in Pisces is the third planet within that trine. And Mars and Vesta and Saturn can give us a lovely focus on getting practical things done. But this is an emotional focus, is what because it's in water signs, right? And so that actually can create a certain amount of flow to get things done, which is nice, especially when we're in a situation where we've got a planet stationing retrograde, which of course then can feel like it's maybe halting forward progress and forcing us to go back and review some things. In this case, pertaining to relationships, which of course stir up lots of emotions. So it should be noted that when we have a trine involving malefics like that, Mars and Saturn, planets that do their work in ways that humans can find to be less than pleasant. So sometimes we can have a greater occurrence of malefic things that will go on. Even though the trine is a supportive aspect, it still is increasing the flow between the malefic planets, right? And so Saturn can emphasize seriousness, long-term consequences of things. Saturn in Pisces, I would definitely say, has related to emotional maturity, but also then can perhaps increase some depressive feelings. And so if you're experiencing that, it's important to remember it's not permanent, right? This is a temporary thing. And then with Mars in the mix, there can be some crankiness, some temper, especially if we're looking at the Saturnian awareness of hardships and obstacles and fears and limitations. And then Saturn, is coloring Mars through that trine, right? And then Mars can be frustrated in response to some of that, even though, like I said, this is a supportive aspect. So it's a little bit more inclined to work at the problem and instead of just sitting there and being frustrated by it. How does that apply to this station retrograde? Well, Venus governs love and beauty and pleasure and wealth and art and fashion and fun things, but also very, very importantly, our ability to connect with others, our relationships, whether that's romantic relationships or any other kind of relationships, family relationships, societal relationships, our work relationships, our social networks, our friend circles, okay? And when we see the Venus stationing retrograde, and throughout this retrograde cycle, Venus is going to be revisiting, in particular, our actions within relationships, in the context of her journey back through Aries. And then we'll get back into the more emotional and intuitive sign of Pisces, that in turn is going to cause us to review our feelings in relationships. Okay. And it is, I do think it is a fortunate thing that Venus is sextile Jupiter at the time of this station. That's two benefics doing what benefics like to do, which is to try to be helpful. Yes, Jupiter is still in detriment in Gemini. And so, that can make it so that even though Jupiter wants to help, it's in Gemini, which deals with information and communication. And so there may be an excess of information, or perhaps, kind of quick and scattered squirrel kind of attention spans, and in particular of the communication that results from that may be a bit scattered and disjointed. And with so much going on in Pisces, then that can contribute to confusion, because Jupiter is the traditional ruler of Pisces. That said, Jupiter's still trying to do good things by us, still trying to bring us opportunities, still trying to encourage our imaginations and inspiration, and to help us keep the faith. Okay. And that's important then in this context, because Jupiter sextile Venus is bringing that feeling of the desire to keep the faith, the desire to have enthusiasm for our relationships, even when we are reconsidering important qualities about those relationships. And since Venus is in Aries, we may start out this retrograde period a bit impulsive, maybe going off a little half-cocked when it comes to relationship issues or concerns. So it's important to recognize if we get into arguments, if we have disagreements or frustrations within our relationships at this time, that it might be wise to take a step back, to take a breath, and not throw the baby out with the bathwater. And then instead, over the course of this retrograde, reconsider, how are we acting within our relationships? How are our frustrations affecting our relationships, since Aries is a Mars ruled sign? How How do we fight within relationships? For some people, there is an attitude that a fight within a relationship is, oh, it's the end of the world, it's the end of the relationship. Whereas for other people, hi, I have an Aries descendant. So for other people, it's like, oh no, we're looking for a good sparring partner. you know, and relationships can actually benefit from our disagreements every bit as much as from our agreements. Um, to the point that once we have been willing to disagree with each other and still maintain the relationship, then when we're in a situation where we need to like get back to back and fight the big fights against outside forces or things that are harmful to ourselves and our partners, that we can actually ally ourselves more decisively, with greater courage, knowing that our relationship can't be broken by a little disagreement.
Well, and some relationships can grow from that. And since this is a water trine and it's about emotions, um, the Saturn, be mature and compassionate for yourself and the other. Mars might want to say, oh, you hurt me. I don't want to talk to you anymore. But yes, you might need a time out or a space to yourself. But, work through it. Take some time and process it and be compassionate for everybody involved.
And Saturn brings patience to that
Mhm.
picture. For some people, again, myself included, if I get into an argument, I may want to take a step back to calm myself down. And if somebody keeps poking the bear, it's going to be a problem. So I have to ask people to be patient and wait and let me like think about it and sort things out. And 9 times out of 10, I'll come back and apologize for whatever I uh, feel like I did wrong within the context of the argument. Um, but yeah, Saturn in this context is saying, be patient, exercise some self discipline, don't go off half cocked, and instead consider what are the long term consequences of your actions in your relationships now. And, um, does your relationship deserve to last? um is it one that will stand the test of time? And if it is, that makes it worth sorting through the disagreements and the challenges and the frustrations, um and slowing your roll a little bit, um, and not doing anything that you're going to regret.
Well, and I always think of Venus retrograde as a really good time to, reevaluate your relationship period or the relationships you're in and like, how can it be better or do I want to continue? Have I outgrown this relationship? Maybe I'm not interested in, maybe it's a club you belong to and it's like I've been going and I just go because I'm so used to going, but that's not even my interest anymore. So, but you might still wanna go because 'cause you've made friends, but you can make that decision.
Right. And that is also important to remember, that this affects, like I said earlier, it affects larger social circles, not just our one on one relationships. It also can affect our finances. So it's really important for us to be aware of that we may experience some financial hiccups, that we need to be careful about impulsive spending with Aries, with Venus in Aries. And if we have been engaged in impulsive spending, then this retrograde period might have us revisiting um, some of those decisions and reconsidering them.
And also, it's a good time to kind of reevaluate your investments. Do you still is it
Yes.
still a good plan, or do you need to make, some adjustments to those, investment plans?
Yes.
Okay, Venus now we have some other aspects, and I'll let you go ahead and start.
Okay, so once again, as was the case with our Pisces new moon that we recently talked about, we still have Juno square Ceres, Juno in the early degrees of Sagittarius, square Ceres in Pisces, and pointing by sesquiquadrate to Mars in Cancer, forming a Taurus hammer configuration, also known as the Fist of God, which, can give us a sense of the pressure that this configuration is associated with. That we feel like we are under pressure to act, and specifically because it's Mars in Cancer, that we are under pressure to act, to protect what matters to us, to protect home and family, and tribe, those who are closest social circles, but also there's that sense of self-protection. And within the context then of Venus's station retrograde, my warning here is that we may feel rather defensive and maybe a little prickly about, if there is any conflict going on within the relationship, because that Mars at the apex of the Taurus hammer, which is, it's like feeling all the pressure from the square between Ceres and Juno, and that's ruling this Venus. And so there can be a kind of a sort of compulsive or driven sense that we can feel in this context. And Taurus hammers can bring up survival level fears. Like, even if the situation is not one in which our survival is threatened, we can feel like it is. And so there can be disproportionate reactions that show up with a Taurus hammer. So it's important for us to be aware of that. And during a station of a planet, all themes of that planet are really being emphasized. So with Venus stationing retrograde, Venus themes will show up, whether or not you're in a romantic relationship. Say you may have money themes that show up, or you may have social circle themes that show up. How are you interacting with people on a day-to-day basis? I've already had clients talking to me about this, saying, "Hey, I noticed this shift, this change in how people around me are acting. Is there something going on in the skies?" Why, yes, there is.
Isn't there always?
Right. And we mentioned the Venus sextile Jupiter. Jupiter is still square the sun. The sun is applying to that square with Jupiter. So that can make egos a bit bigger. It can make us very enthusiastic, but it can also make us perhaps a bit too big for our britches. And then Mars is square Chiron. So this Mars is like got a whole bunch going on. I mean, I'm really glad that it has that reception from the moon, because it needs that support with which to navigate all this other stuff. Mars squaring Chiron, and Chiron is in Mars's sign, so Mars does have something of the upper hand there. But when we've got Mars square Chiron, there is a greater likelihood of athletic injury. There is a greater likelihood of sensitivity to fights, sensitivity to disagreements, or also with Chiron and Aries, we have been this fairly lengthy transit of Chiron and Aries has had us being confronted by the ways in which we feel like we are not able to be independent, not as as strong and capable as we might wish. We can feel like our executive function is limited in some way. And a lot of times it can feel, because it's Chiron, it can feel like that these are things that we don't know how to fix for ourselves. We also can see toxic masculinity issues show up here. And this kind of myth of, being able to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, which that expression originated as something that was an impossible task. And yet in our society, there's this notion of like, oh, sure, you can manage to do this impossible thing. No sweat, right? And no pain, no gain, and all of that. And that we are starting to see has caused some problems for us, both as individuals and as a society. And so this Mars Chiron square then may really emphasize some of those issues for us and ask us, how are we going to act about that? How are we going to engage with those we care about in a way that is acknowledging our weaknesses and our struggles, and rather than blaming ourselves or others for them, instead recognize, oh wait, humans are social animals. We're not meant to live eternally apart and independent and all of that. Yes, certainly there are things that we can do to pull our own weight, but we're doing that within a larger context of our relationships, of our interdependency with all other life, which is really being emphasized by that stellium in Pisces. So the last thing I want to mention here is the Pluto square to Aia, and Pluto in Aquarius is emphasizing the sort of the informational structure of our society. Traditionally, it's ruled by Saturn, and then modern astrologers, of course, will note the affinity with Uranus. And so there is that push-pull that is inherent in Aquarius between the structure and the rules of society, and then the desire to change and grow and evolve, looking to the future. Okay, and then Pluto reveals the power dynamics, including the shadow obsessions and compulsions, the machinations that are driving things from underneath the surface. Okay, we see the wealth of oligarchs calling the shots. We see technocracy with Pluto in Aquarius. And now all of that is square to Aia. Now, Aia is an asteroid named for a Greek goddess associated with health, but in particular, the things that contribute to health. And from her name, we get the word hygiene. Okay. And Aia in Taurus is emphasizing that what is contributing to our health, or what we may need to adjust in order to have better health, is are these Taurus topics, okay, which would relate to, yes, our basic survival needs: food, shelter, water, okay, some material creature comforts, but also because Taurus is ruled by Venus, there is that need for those things to be good things, not just getting by, but thriving, right? Having good food shared with good friends in a good place, a place that has some aesthetically pleasing qualities to it and feels comfortable, right? And so there is strain now, tension between that Pluto in Aquarius, that structure of an increasingly technocratic and oligarchic society, and its rules and its power struggles and machinations versus the things that we need to keep us happy and healthy on a physical and material level. And I definitely see this as connected to the price of eggs, but more importantly, like, all of the economic turmoil that is going on right now. And so it is important for us under this influence then to pay attention to what are like the most simple, basic, yet comforting things that we can do for our bodies, including getting more rest, making sure that what food we do eat is nourishing, making sure that we, do things that are physically comforting to ourselves, especially with the ruler of Taurus stationing retrograde in Aries and being, Aries can be really driven, right? Go, go, go. It can be athletic, which is great, except with Mars squaring Chiron, the potential for injury, right? And so we can see how,
you have to be in good shape first. It's like
there is that.
if you haven't gone skiing or you haven't walked 5 miles and all of a sudden you want to walk 5 miles, you might be pretty sore.
Right. Or you might, you could literally, walk down the block and twist your ankle, right? Mm-hmm. There is this need to be slow and gentle with ourselves with in Taurus. Okay. Especially with all this kind of martial flavored Aries stuff going on, and the ruler of Taurus in Aries and stationing retrograde.
Thank you. So then we're going to go on to Venus stations direct, and it stations within 1 degree of the opposition degree to the lunar eclipse at 23 degrees of Virgo that happens on March 13th. So it's really close to that degree. So to me, that's always significant. It kind of is waking up that degree again. It's like reminding us. I call it ringing the bell. So it's like the bell got rung on March 14th, and then on April 12th, the bell's going to ring again. So do you have anything to say about that?
Right. That's like an echo of whatever happened during the lunar eclipse. So whatever's going on mid-March, we are likely then to revisit at the time of Venus's station direct. And I do want to point out that for those living in the United States, March 14th is when we are looking at, there is the question of the debt ceiling needing to be raised, and the government continued funding, and of course the threat of a government shutdown if Congress cannot come to an agreement about all of that. So I do find that very significant that we've got that going on at the time of the eclipse while Venus is retrograde. And then when Venus, who governs wealth and affects our economy on that level, right, is then stationing direct and ringing that bell. And that suggests to me that whatever it is that Congress decides or does not decide during that time, we're going to see consequences of that come April 12th when Venus stations direct.
So here's the aspects for the Venus stationing direct, and I'll let you dive right in.
Okay, so once again, Mars is involved. Although this time Mars is not ruling Venus, because Venus is now in Pisces. But we see Mars at the apex of a T-square with the moon and the sun and Chiron and Aries. We've got this full moon that is going on relatively close to that. And so that is, at this point, the sun is in Aries. So the sun is being ruled by that Mars. And Mars has reception from the moon, which is in Libra, which is ruled by that stationing Venus. It's one of the things I love in astrology, is seeing how all these things get interconnected with each other and influencing each other. Okay, so a T-square then is, creates a certain amount of friction, right? The opposition, the sun and the moon are facing each other, looking at each other from opposite camps, and saying, okay, we're both aware of each other. How on earth do we get the opposites to get along with each other, to work with each other? An opposition has something of the nature of Saturn. And so there can be this kind of immobilized feeling that goes with that, as we're, looking at what's opposite of us and trying to make sense of it. And then with Mars square that increases a sense of friction. Squares have the nature of Mars. And so, so this can add to tension at the time of the Venus station. With the moon in a Venus-ruled sign, we're likely to be really feeling on an emotional and kind of knee-jerk reaction level this importance of relationships and the emphasis on all things Venusian, including relationships, connections, wealth, also aesthetics. Okay, that kind of thing gets brought up, which might not seem so important when we're, maybe faced with economic concerns or, a tiff with our spouse. But one of the things we can see with Venus stations is like, that sudden urge to change our hairstyle or to, change how we have decorated our home. And when there's tension with that, of course, that can affect other things, including relationships. Going right back in a circle. Okay. So we've got that T-square that is making for a more tense environment. And it, like I said, it's, with the sun and moon. So that when the sun and moon are opposite, that's a full moon. Okay. We then got this triangle of potential between Ceres in Pisces, at the point of Thales, to an opposition between Vesta in Scorpio, which is ruled by that Mars, and Aea in Taurus, which is ruled by Venus. Okay. So again, there's that friction between our desire to connect and our will to act. Our will to act that is still in Cancer, and therefore is still inclined to be defensive, self-protective, but also concerned with, protecting home and family and what's near and dear to us. And so I do feel like there can be some reactiveness that we are likely to see during this station direct, with this opposition between Aea and Vesta. Vesta is where our focus is, and she's in Scorpio, which governs deep emotions and also governs that which is mysterious and hidden, the process of transformation, intense experiences that lead us to change on more than just surface levels. Okay. And that combination right there then can have us feeling really challenged with how do we take care of ourselves in this kind of a potentially emotionally fraught situation. And how do we take care of our physical needs while still paying attention to our emotional needs? And Ceres here at the point of Thales to that opposition then is sort of the negotiator, the mediator between these two goddess asteroids in opposition to each other. And so Ceres then is going to remind us that it's really important for us to pay attention to what are we hungry for, not just our physical hungers, but because she's in Pisces, our emotional hungers. And in particular, in Pisces, a huge part of that hunger is for connection. Pisces really emphasizes the interconnectedness of all life, not just human life, right? Our awareness of nature, our desire to, connect with our pets and connect with the wild animals outside, and even be in a harmonious relationship with insects and with microbes and all of that. Okay. And so that Ceres in particular is reminding us of the bigger picture. At the same time, Ceres can deal with grief. And right now, the bigger picture for all life on Earth is there's some grimness to that, because we've got a lot of species are going extinct right now as a result of human pollution and global warming and all of that. So it's not that Ceres in Pisces is just, giving us this kind of happy-go-lucky view of like the internet connectedness of life. She's reminding us that, that there are serious things going on with that web of life. And therefore, the choices that we should be making about what is going to be healthy for us need to also consider what is healthier for the larger environment, and how does the loss of life in other species, how does the loss of biodiversity affect us? And I feel like that's the backdrop to our emotional states right now, that even if we're not conscious of this stuff, even if we're in denial and are just like, oh yeah, global warming is a hoax, well, guess what? Lots of things dying off around us. It's kind of hard for us to completely ignore that. Even some folks who would be self-described psychic bricks have been saying, hey, something big's going on. And so I feel like Ceres in this position is reminding us that we need to take care of ourselves within that larger context, to remember how we're connected. And that includes doing things like taking time to grieve for what has been lost, taking time to recognize that that we need to make some larger changes than just what is personally affecting us, and that it's okay to feel the intensity of that right now. Finally, go on.
That's great. I mean, yeah, because it's important to feel our emotions. And, even Mars is direct. It's like still been very active in the charts lately.
Right. And we see the final aspect to address here is that Jupiter is squaring that Ceres. And of course, whatever Jupiter touches, Jupiter makes bigger. And Jupiter is ruling that Pisces. Jupiter traditionally rules Pisces and rules this whole huge stellium that's still going on in Pisces. And that leads us back to Venus's station direct. She is conjoining Saturn. So there is a sense of that seriousness that Saturn brings to the table. And they're both ruled by that Jupiter that is squaring Ceres. And one of the things about Jupiter is that Jupiter relates to our faith, not just our spiritual or religious faith, though he does rule those things, but of absolute importance at this time, our faith that we can come to some solutions, our faith that we can make things better, that things will work out all right, that there are real possibilities for growth and change that do not simply involve, dog paddling our way through a bad situation, right? Literally with so much going on in Pisces, it can feel like, the water's rising. Okay. And so in order for us to be able to make it through, we have to have faith that we can make it through. With Venus conjoining Saturn, it suggests long-term consequences to the choices that we make about our relationships right now and our material resources right now and what values we're going to uphold right now. Okay. But if we get into the Saturnine potential for despair, that makes it harder to go on. And so for us to be able to continue, we have to muster some faith. For some people, that will be faith in a higher power. For some people, that will be faith in human beings. For some people, that will be faith in ourselves and those who are closest to us. However it is that we generate that faith, now is the time to recognize that that is crucial, not just for us as individuals to go on, but for all of life on Earth to go on. No pressure.
Thank you. And then we have a few more aspects here. We have another grand trine going on, and this one's water and fire. It's out of element, so it's a mix. But I'll let you jump in.
Right. It's by degree rather than by sign. And so in this case, it's tapping into, we've got Juno in Sagittarius, ruled by that Jupiter that I was just talking about. And Juno in Sagittarius, Juno relates to our commitments. Okay. It's not enough for us to say, oh, yes, I love and adore you and I want to be with you forever. But then there's the day-to-day reality of the relationship that may have started out all romantic, but now, you got to figure out who washes the dishes and who takes out the garbage. Okay. That's what Juno is concerned with. What are the agreements that keep our relationships and our institutions going? What are the promises that we make, the oaths we take? Okay. And so, yes, she can be associated with long-term and committed relationships, but I would say that it's more about the promises, the commitments that those relationships are built on, rather than the relationships themselves. She's part of the mechanism that allows them to continue. Okay. And so here she is then in this trine with that Venus and Saturn. And Saturn really emphasizes longevity of a relationship, is a relationship built to last. So with Juno in the mix, then Juno is like, yes, here are the agreements that will help the relationship to last. And since Juno is in Sagittarius, and at that 0 degree of Sagittarius, she is retrograde. So she's reconsidering what are the ideals and philosophies behind our agreements. Are we being honest and direct with our agreements? Sagittarius is the archer, the straight shooter. Okay. Because Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, then there's a sense of the bigness of those commitments. The archer seeks the far horizon with the arrow that they're shooting. Okay. The centaur, which is also a symbol for Sagittarius, is both that which is human and that which is beast, that which is wild. Okay. And what do horses like to do? They like to gallop. Okay. And so, this is a Juno who is then reconsidering, how do we have freedom and room for a little bit of wildness within our commitments? Our commitments can't just be something that suffocates us. Okay. There has to be room for both the civilized and the wild, both the man and the beast within our commitments and agreements that keep our relationships going. And then Mars, the last member of this grand trine, is the action that is needed to actually make those commitments real, to uphold them, to uphold our self-discipline within our relationships that we see with that Saturn and Venus, to take the actions that will connect us rather than driving us apart. Mars likes to drive things apart, but in Cancer, Mars is in a sign, where Mars is considered to be in detriment because Mars likes to drive things apart and Cancer likes to pull things together. But Mars in Cancer is, again, as I said before, protective of what we love. And in this case, in the context of, Venus is station direct, protective of our relationships, protective of our social connections, protective of our values, protective of our material resources, and protective of, our sense of what is beautiful and good in life.
And that Saturn is like doing the work to keep your commitment and have your relationship, but it's also the glue that holds you together too. And then I wanted to point out that also the North Node, Mercury, and Neptune are all part of that grand trine too. So Neptune is like dream big and new dreams, because it's in Aries.
Mercury is sometimes considered to be a governing dreaming within the chart. And so Mercury is still in Pisces there, getting ready to head into Aries to join up with that Neptune. And so, and even though Mercury can be considered to be in detriment in Pisces, there is a potential for, we can see with Mercury this kind of in Pisces, rather than operating on the basis of logic, instead intuiting what others are thinking about. So there can almost seem like, telepathy, which makes things interesting in terms of the context then of relationships, in terms of the context of this Venus station. With Mercury being, as you pointed out, I mean, it's actually all of these planets are pretty conjunct here. This Venus, Saturn, and then the North Node in Mercury. Neptune is, kind of cross sign conjunct there with Mercury and is trine that Juno. So then, yes, that says, imagine and dream big about what are the possibilities for the commitments that you are reconsidering now, with that Juno retrograde. And as you've mentioned, that Neptune has at this point entered Aries. That's the big astrological news at the end of March that we're going to be addressing further in future shows. But Neptune entering Aries, that's the second of the outer planets to go from a yin sign to a yang sign. Uranus will be the last of those in July. And this signals a really big shift in terms of the energies that are affecting this generation. And basically the next 20 years, certainly, with Pluto during the Pluto in Aquarius time, but also a larger cycle. It's unusual to have all three of these outer planets doing this shift from yin to yang all at the same time. And the Saturn that is currently with Venus in this chart is going to be, heading over to conjoin that Neptune, and it's going to be a big deal. The dreams that we have had being then brought the potential to make them real. Saturn is all about reality, right?
Exactly.
And so big dreams and reality in a sign associated with action. That is quite the power to make a very big new beginning, because it's at that 0 degrees of Aries. But we'll get to that at another point in time. And the last thing I should mention here, we see Venus sextile Uranus, that great liberator, that great change maker. And so that can, I very much feel like that gives potential to start off on a new foot with our relationships and with our renewed, re-examined and renewed values, and with our finances.
Oh, there's a lot going on with this Venus retrograde and then stationing direct.
Oh, yeah.
So, if you could sum up a couple of points that, people to focus on maybe during this phase.
Well, Venus, stationing retrograde and is going to be traveling back through Aries, is definitely asking us to reconsider how we act within relationships, because that's a fire sign. But also what keeps our relationships alight, right? What is the spirit, the fire, the spark within them? And perhaps, maybe asking us to reconsider what frustrations or conflicts we experience within our relationships, and how are we acting about those? How are we addressing those? And then when Venus moves back into Pisces, now we're getting back into the emotional impact of all of this, and our feelings and intuitions regarding our relationships and our connections and our finances. And so, because this Venus retrograde is in two different signs, two different modalities, there's a lot of content that we're covering here, a lot of stuff that is likely to come up. We may find that we encounter things related to past relationships, and that we may end up, revisiting past actions within relationships, or in relation to our money. And so that's a lot.
It is.
It's a lot. So it's important that when we are experiencing transits like this, if we're feeling any kind of overwhelm, or like, oh my goodness, I'm doomed as a relation, as a result of this, especially with the Saturnian connections that go on there, it's important to take a step back. Remember, this too shall pass, and consider what is it that you can learn from this period of review that is helpful, kindly, truthful. Okay, if you think you're learning from something, but it feels like you're beating yourself up in the process, that's not actually the real lesson that you should be learning from something. Instead, the lessons that we want to emphasize here are the ones that encourage us to treat ourselves and others with greater kindness. So
Oh, I like
astrology is
that.
not a stick to beat ourselves over the head with, right? Right.
Right. Well, yeah, it's a time to review. And, if you haven't been in a relationship for a while, you might find yourself, you're ready to be in a relationship around the corner. Um, a craving for sugar could come up. So be aware
Mhm.
of that and maybe just try to work with that so that you're not eating too much sugar. Um, but, it's like be compassionate with yourself and find time to take a moment out here and there when you can.
And also recognize that, even if you do not feel like you're going to be immediately affected by this because it's not impacting anything in your chart, other people around you are likely to be. And so if people are, maybe behaving a bit weirdly, consider it might not be you. It might
That's
really just
true.
be that they're being impacted by this on a much bigger level than you are.
Yeah, and you can support them in some way.
Yeah.
So that's good. Okay, Simon has a Patreon page, and I'll let her tell you about that.
Right. So I write about astrology there, and I do artwork that is based in astrology, including custom artwork for my patrons based on placements in their natal charts and also solar returns. In fact, I just did a solar return piece this week, and I've got another one coming up for a patron this week. Um, so yeah, if you are interested in that, please come visit our little community there. And like Liz, I am a consulting astrologer. So if you are interested in a consult, I can be found at iconalchemy.com.
Thank you, Simon. And I want to take a moment here to thank all those that are watching live and those that come back and watch later, that we appreciate your support. Leave a comment, ask a question, subscribe. And I have do consultations like Simon mentioned. I have a newsletter that's going out tonight or tomorrow. I have almost done with it. And then my YouTube channel. And then other episodes with the Astrology Star Sisters are Chinese astrology, decans using astrology and tarot, dwarf planets, fixed stars, planet stationing, Uranian astrology, and Venus star point. And the astrological highlights of 2025, there's still a few more episodes to come. And if you've missed any of those, you can find those on my YouTube channel. New show coming up is Magical Astrology with Robert Passetti. And then Justin and I do the astrology forecast each month, the full moon forecast, and a Chiron asteroid series. And then I will be on Talk Cosmos on March 30th. You can watch it live here on my channel or watch it at your convenience on my channel. And again, to get a hold of Simon, it's iconalchemy.com, and my website is alightpath.com. And I want to thank you, Simon, for joining me today. And I look forward to us getting together for our next talk down the road. So I want to
Thank you
say
for
bye
having
for now.